Nicole Fiorellino here to talk to us about that, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you.
Who's that? Clifford.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Okay, I realize I'm the second to last speaker at the end of a long day. I saw the end of Ben's presentation. I just want to say that stuff is so important, and study up. And Ben really just was able to like crest the surface of it. So, but that stuff is super important. I am Nicole Fiorellino. I am the extension agronomist for University of Maryland. I do research and extension related to our major agronomic crops. Kayla reached out for me to give this lecture because I happen to do my PhD work in environmental science and technology, and P loss and P risk was kind of the focus of my work. So super excited to talk about it, and 100% my fault that you guys don't have my slides. It's not Brian or Kayla. I was working on them up until like the moment I left my office to come here and give a presentation. So sorry about that, but we'll make sure to get color copies and you all can get them digitally to study. So I'm going to try to cover as much of the basics behind, P risk assessment, P loss, and I'm very confident that Kayla is going to go through a lot more of the nitty gritty of the actual putting together a plan eventually. So I'm trying to hit the background information. My contact information is at the end. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got questions. Just like Ben's previous talk, these are really dense topics to try to do in a 20-minute presentation. So we're doing the best we can, and just know that there's more background information. You can always reach out to Kayla, Brian, any of us if you've got more detailed questions. Can everybody hear me okay? Just checking. All right. So quick outline of what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about excessive soil P concentrations. Why do we care about excessive soil P concentrations? How are we identifying and managing not only excessive soil P, but the risk of loss associated with that? And then our last couple slides are going to be Nicole's guidance to growers, but a lot of this is going to be spit out automatically when you're generating that plan using the PMT tool. I'm just kind of rehashing it and trying to leave you with talking points. When you've got a grower sitting in front of you in your office talking about the plan, and they're like, what am I supposed to do about this? These are just some talking points that's just above and beyond, the printout, what's going to be spit out for your plan. All right, so why are soil P concentrations excessive? All right, and excessive, we've got 4 broad categories. We're talking like really high. Why do we see really high soil P concentrations? Why is this kind of a Maryland-ish centric issue, right? There's some parts of the country that have high soil P, but it's related to their parent material. The rocks that weathered and became that soil was just naturally high in P. But that's not our issue here in Maryland, okay? Our issue here in Maryland was caused by humans, okay? I'll say it's in a limited area. I don't want anyone to leave this room with this feeling that everywhere in the state has really high P and we're just leaking it everywhere, because that's not truly the case, okay? We've got limited parts of the state where high soil P and then the associated risk of losing phosphorus is a problem, but it's not generally widespread. It's not everywhere, okay? And it is because we did this as humans over time. Not we, I don't think anyone here in this room probably was responsible for that, but humans at some point made the concentrations of phosphorus high in our soils, all right? And I'm gonna go into a little bit more on that in a second. Why is that, okay? If we look at this very basic schematic that I have up here on the screen, the yellow bars on the left are representing if we were going to grow corn, for example, and purposefully unitless. We're not looking at numbers here. This is just a visual kind of analogy. All right, we need, the height of each of these bars of N, P, and K to grow that corn crop, okay? And if we choose to use a manure source like poultry litter to fertilize this corn crop, well, that poultry litter has some concentration of N, P, and K, all right? But if we use that fertilizer or we use that manure to provide all of the nitrogen to that crop, we are adding more P and K, but we're not going to talk about K. We're adding more P than what that crop needs, okay? This is a very simple basic schematic showing what happened over a long period of time, okay? Folks were using manure, poultry litter, which is a fantastic fertilizer source. Don't leave and say Nicole said we don't like manure. Nicole loves manure, okay? And manure is a great fertilizer source, but we just have to be conscious and we have to think about what we're doing with it, all right? And this ends up being the result if you are using manure to provide all of the nitrogen to a growing crop, okay? We have learned that putting too much phosphorus over time can saturate a soil's capacity to hold it. And my favorite analogy is thinking about overfilling a cup, right? Or overfilling a glass. You know how in your kitchen you got the tall glasses and you got the short glasses, right? So a tall glass and a short glass here represents different types of textures, all right? A clayey, heavier soil is more like a tall cup. It's got more capacity to hold on to that phosphorus, all right? But these small little tiny cups are more like maybe a sandy coastal plain soil. The capacity is just smaller, okay? And so over time, as you're adding more manure, doing this, you're filling up that cup. And at some point, regardless of the soil type, you're going to overflow that. I just want to make the point that what I just said to you very cavalierly, very casually, is kind of new knowledge, okay? Researchers 40 years ago didn't fully understand this cup analogy, all right? We thought that soils had kind of an infinite capacity to hold on to phosphorus. So I said that very calmly and casually, but you know, that's a big deal, and that's kind of new science, if you will, a new understanding that folks didn't have, all right? So, you know, at the time when folks were putting down a lot of these manure recommendations, they were following the recommendations at the time. We didn't know the whole cup analogy, all right? So our recommendations were, yeah, use manure, it's a great source, and use it to provide all the nitrogen to your crop, okay? The environmental challenges that we are dealing with very specifically here in the Chesapeake Bay really accelerated our knowledge, really gave us, you know, lit a fire under our butts, if you will, to really learn more about phosphorus. And I would go on to say I'm involved in a lot of national phosphorus working groups that, you know, in the Mid-Atlantic region, because of the Chesapeake Bay, we are really pioneering and pushing ahead and trying to understand these high P issues. So go us. There's something positive out of this, okay? So why do we care about excessive soil P, all right? We really want to prevent further degradation of our aquatic systems, okay? So when we put phosphorus, nitrogen too, but we're keeping the focus on phosphorus today, right? When we put phosphorus into our water bodies, we get this huge growth of submerged aquatic vegetation, which ultimately decreases the quality of our water, all right? These aquatic ecosystems are naturally P limited. Phosphorus generally only exists on the land. It's not very common in natural aquatic ecosystems. So when we feed phosphorus to the bay, to other water bodies, the plants under the water are like, oh, now I can grow, right? And that was kind of purposeful. There's not naturally a lot of phosphorus in the water, so the growth tends to be limited. So we're kind of short-circuiting what's naturally happening there. So we really want to focus on keeping that phosphorus on the land, preventing it from getting into water, all right? So I've been talking about soil P, soil P, soil P. And as we start transitioning, getting into this conversation, into this presentation, I want to make sure we're getting to the point that excessive soil P is really only half of the equation, okay? Just because we've got a lot of phosphorus in our soil does not always mean right away it's going to be in the bay, okay? So let's keep that in perspective kind of as we move forward here, all right? What do I mean when I say that, all right? Just soil P alone is only half of the equation. It's only part of the equation. Let's zoom in here and look at some data from, this is a small watershed up near Penn State University, all right? And so these dashed black lines represent kind of like the outline, the confines of this watershed. And all the land area that's within these hashed lines drains kind of downward into the center to this river, this outlet that kind of removes the water from that watershed. A perfect target area to look at something like phosphorus loss, because it's such a small area that we can really characterize everything that's happening in that landscape, okay? So the researchers up at Penn State saw that 90% of the phosphorus that was getting into this water body was only coming from 10% of the land, this kind of red outlined area there, all right? After like super intense research, that's what they determined, okay? So that is where we know the phosphorus is coming from. Let's overlay here a soils map, all right? So green is representing fields that are considered low. Doesn't really matter what low, medium, and high is, but we're just gonna go with this for right now, right? So green is low, and medium is yellow, and red is high, okay? And then if you kind of like look to the left, look to the right, look to the left, look to the right, you can see that the red, the 10% of the area that is contributing 90% of the P loss touches a whole bunch of these different fields here, all right? So yeah, this field down here, this green one is low, and there's phosphorus coming out of there, right? The source, the soil P is low, but they know phosphorus is coming from there. Consequently, look at this kind of oven mitt-ish shaped field over here, right? This is high. There's a high source. There could be excessive soil P here, but none of that phosphorus is being lost and getting into that water body. Source is only half of the equation, all right? Excessive soil P is only half of the equation, all right? Why? The phosphorus has to get to the water body somehow, right? Just because it's there, it has to move and physically get to that body of water. So that transport pathway is the other half of the equation, all right? This is the very simple like premise of how we ended up with a p-index or a PMT, generations later. This very simple idea of source and transport. All right, so what does that mean? Let's zoom in again, same watershed up near Penn State, all right? We've got the blue arrow down here representing that outlet. There's some kind of water body here, right? And these are kind of like contoured fields here, okay? So there's this field up here, and these little boxes are monitoring, the runoff that's coming off of that field. Same with here, these boxes are monitoring this field, and these boxes here are monitoring this field. You can see they're managed differently. That one's got like corn, different kind of crop. All right, and we've got our slope, which means our water is generally going to move across the surface and move down. All right, so let's take a snapshot of what we're seeing in those fields. All right, the highest phosphorus in the soil is up here in this field, and the lowest phosphorus is down here right next to this body of water. Okay. In terms of this research project, they said, all right, we're going to add some phosphorus upstream here. These high fields, they have high soil P. We're going to add more phosphorus to them. This field down here closest to the water is low. We're not going to add any more phosphorus to it. All right. This is just the quantity, the pure amount of water that came off of these fields, right? Minimal. Holy cow, that's a whole lot of water that came off. Okay, that's just from this little field right here, okay? And then when we look at the concentration of phosphorus in that runoff, negligible, holy cow, that's a lot, all right? And this had the lowest soil P and did not get any more phosphorus added to it, okay? So transport is also as important as source, okay? And that is the premise behind a p-index, PMT, that's what we call it here in Maryland, right? Is using this principle of sources of phosphorus and transport pathways of phosphorus overlapping into what we call critical source areas, all right? So we are trying to figure out with a p-index, with a PMT, where those critical sources are. Where do we have the source and where do we have the transport of phosphorus? That's where there is a high risk of phosphorus loss. It's a risky area, all right? And then once we identify those areas, how do we target management changes to those specific areas to prevent loss or mitigate losses, all right? So that's the background of a p-index right there. All right, I'm very proud of these next few slides, and I'm gonna go through them kind of slowly. There's some animation. I don't know how well this is gonna translate to your static slides, so we'll do our best, all right? I wanna go through the principles of the different phosphorus transport pathways. And this is really important and when we move forward and we talk about management and recommendations, all right? So it's really important to understand which of your phosphorus transport pathways are contributing the most risk, okay? Because when recommending management changes, they're different and often like encounter to one another depending on what that transport pathway is, all right? So We have three major transport pathways, and if you go kind of out of Maryland, one of them usually falls off, all right? So we've got particulate phosphorus loss, we've got runoff or dissolved P losses, and then we've got this subsurface route, okay? We're gonna go through all of these. Again, nuanced, but they're important and they're different. All right, so let's talk about particulate P loss, all right? In this transport pathway, our phosphorus is within, it's part of a soil particle, all right? So maybe there's some iron, maybe there's some aluminum, there's some type of chemistry happening in that microscopic soil particle that I zoomed in on that is holding phosphorus in it, all right? Generally, we're going to see particulate P losses in a sloped landscape, all right? We're going to get a really heavy storm, we're going to get a really flashy storm, we're going to get, some type of event that is going to physically move that entire soil particle off of the field into a nearby water body, all right? And that's how we're losing the P. It's taking the soil with it, or it's going with the soil. So how do we manage this? How do we deal with this, right? We want to recommend practices that are going to decrease erosion, keep those soil particles in place on that field. No-till, minimize tillage, cover crop, anything that's going to keep that soil covered, protect it from loss in a precipitation type event, okay? Mental note, you don't have to memorize it, but just pay attention as we're going and talk about the next types of losses and management, all right? That was particulate, that was erosion. Let's talk about runoff P, all right? This is the same kind of landscape where we have kind of a sloped landscape. Water is going to, interact with this field, and then there's going to be some runoff, okay? But this brown blob is now manure. It's not a soil particle anymore, it's manure. Maybe it's a little tiny particle, a little prill of fertilizer that Ben just talked about that he applied, right? There is a source of P on the surface. And when it is exposed to a precipitation event, for example, that phosphorus actually dissolves out of that source and is lost from the field that way. So that turd, for lack of a better term, that manure may still be on the field, but that phosphorus is dissolved out of it and it's gone, all right? So what type of management, what type of recommendations? Okay, number one, don't put P on that field, right? Easier said than done. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't always know when there's going to be a giant rainstorm. So farmers are doing the best they can. Try to time your manure, not when it's going to rain, right? But the other thing we can do is incorporate that manure. Don't leave that really soluble, that really vulnerable source of P just sitting out, hanging out on the surface there, exposed to a rainstorm, all right? Maybe some type of tillage to increase that contact between the manure and the soil to hold on to that P. Now, if you're paying attention, which I know is tough because at the end of the day, that's literally the exact opposite of what I just said in the last slide, right? The last slide I said, no till, minimize tillage, right? But it's a different kind of loss pathway that we're worried about here. That's why it's really important to identify the appropriate loss pathway because the management recommendations are polar opposites. Okay. All right. The final one we're going to talk about is subsurface P loss. Honestly, I'll go so far that if you talk to some people outside of our state, they don't even agree that this exists, that there's not this type of loss pathway. All right. This is a very specific, kind of very focused in our region. I'm thinking lower Eastern Shore. Flat landscape, close proximity to water, artificial drainage, very high water table, low clay content, high sand content. I'm thinking lower Eastern Shore, really intensively ditched, okay? I couldn't make this diagram very flat, but just bear with me. This is a flat landscape, and this is a ditch, okay? I labeled it open ditch, okay? So we have phosphorus that's being used, over time in these landscapes, and phosphorus is being applied, and again, a very sandy, very light soil, so that phosphorus is going to move vertically in that profile, and then to some extent, it will eventually bump into an iron or aluminum. There's some clay there, right? So that little kind of short cup, there's eventually some capacity for that soil to be able to hold on to phosphorus. But you get to a point where, and very quickly, where that soil is saturated with P. So every potential binding site here, for example, these iron and aluminums, are all bound up with phosphorus. This is a scenario where your cup is full, okay? And so if the farmer is coming through and adding more phosphorus on top of this, there's nowhere for it to go. There's nowhere for it to be bound up. So it's going to move vertically into that profile and very quickly bump into surface water and get pulled into that open ditch. And if you are somewhere where you've got a ditch, man, you are pretty close to the Chesapeake Bay, all right? Pretty close to some water source. Excuse me. So what is our recommendation in this scenario? Deep tillage. Try to increase the contact between absorbed P and P source, but those soil particles that basically are not saturated, all right? In these situations, especially where there's been long-term no-till, you see a very shallow saturated layer, all right? So in this scenario, if someone's really having a problem with this type of loss pathway, honestly, there's not much for them to do except like literally flip their soil over, right? Like bring up some of that deep soil that's not saturated with P. There's really very limited options at this point, all right? Especially just because of the nature of where they're located. So that was like 3 really different loss pathways and 3 really different kind of management scenarios associated with kind of dealing with that, all right? So our savior, in theory, is the P-index, right? So let's take a look at how the P-index has evolved over time as we've all kind of collectively learned about these different loss pathways together. So the first generation of a P-index, this is just like straight math, okay? We knew there were sources of phosphorus and we knew there were transport pathways. So the initial thing to do is like, all right, let's just add them all together, all right? To be clear, every state has their own P-index, and different states do different things with their P-indexes, and different states have different interpretations of their P-index score. So just to be very clear, Maryland's P-index is a risk assessment tool. This number, no matter what iteration we're talking about here, is a unitless number that falls into some category with management attached to it, okay? This number in the Maryland P-index, no matter what iteration, is not a load value, okay? So by adding together your source factors and your transport factors, this number is just a unitless risk score. I just want to make that very clear because other states have different interpretations of their P-indexes. Just want to make it clear what it is in Maryland, all right? So the first generation, the initial folks who came up with the P-index said, let's just add it all together. Boom, math. All right, second generation. They're like, yeah, I think we can get a little more mechanistic here with this. Maybe that's not the right way mathematically to just add all of these numbers together. So maybe we should actually multiply them. Take your source factors and take your transport factors, multiply them together. Again, this is just an index. This is a unitless value, okay? And that was the second generation. And we in Maryland kind of lived through the second generation of the P-index for a very long time. It wasn't until, I wanted to say recently, but it's kind of like a decade ago at this point, that we moved forward with this idea of a component or multiplicative version of this equation, where we really were able to separate out those different transport pathways and their associated sources, okay? And so we basically took 3 of these and added them together for that final P-index PMT score. This was more mechanistic. This really more represents what is happening in the landscape, all right? It's not an equal contribution by any means of those 3 loss pathways. In some areas, one is high, and in some areas, a different one is high. So just from a mathematical standpoint, this equation just truly better represents what's happening in the real world. And we actually like to depict it kind of in this way. And it's really like a 3-pronged Venn diagram here, 3 different times, right? Based on those little animations we just went through, there's different management recommendations depending on which transport pathway is dominating, all right? And so visually, if you're a visual learner like me, this is the best way to think about the PMT, all right? These 3 Venn diagrams of transport, source, and management, and they're separately representing those loss pathways, because for most of Maryland, this is the case. We don't really, the subsurface doesn't matter. So mathematically, this can be 0, and it's not going to change the equation, right? We still have the contribution of the other loss pathways, all right? So this is what the actual equation looks like if you're going to write it out. The management, source, and transport is built in there to those 3 different pathways, all right? And I'm referencing this technical users guide, which I'm sure is part of your resources. No?
Online.
Online, yeah, it's online. I put the link there too. I double checked it to make sure it's there.
Yeah, it is.
I always double check the university links now because they like to change them on us. And this user's guide, which I wrote, by the way, provides the scientific background, and it gives you a step-by-step method for calculation. I'm not going to go into that too much. I'm assuming that's part of what Kayla's doing. If you're in a situation where you actually had to calculate this by hand, you could, and all the instructions are in that fact sheet. But it's more likely that you're going to use the digital tool, plug and chug, and it's going to follow this. But if you want to have a better understanding of the science that went behind that, it's all here in this technical users guide. All right, I'm not going to go too much into this because this is out of my bailiwick, but I just do want to kind of go through some of the general about the PMT, how you would actually calculate it, all right? Just to be clear, when you calculate the PMT, when that field has a phosphorus, FIV, unitless conversion of greater than or equal to 150, that's the tipping point, okay? You're not going to run the PMT on every single field. Once a field goes over that tipping point of that 150 FIV, that's when you have to start running the PMT. All right, just to be clear. And you're going to see in a minute when I go through the bajillion bullet points of all the data that you need. Some of it just is automatically pulled in, but it's a lot. You wouldn't want to run this on every single field, and it's not necessary. All right, there's science behind the fact that 150 is that tipping point. Okay, and remember, that's because source is only half of the equation. Okay, so 150 just says, there's a chance for some risk here. Let's take it, let's take it a step further and actually run the PMT and do that calculation. All right. I'm not going to read these one by one. You're going to have a copy of it. It's not necessary, but there is a certain amount of information about that field that is necessary. Okay, the actual physical location of that field to calculate the PMT. You can get that from Web Soil Survey. There's other sources. These are some of the soil kind of map unit. Again, field information that you need to know. I'm not going to tell you how to calculate that. That's for another day. There is some information that you need to get either from the grower. Some of it you may have to go out and get yourself surface water. Honestly, now I'm sure you can get most of that on maps. Don't hold me to that. I'm not regulatory. But there's some level of information. You've got to talk to the grower. But honestly, most of this is probably in your nutrient management plan anyway. When I was doing the research on this and running the scenarios, I was going out to the field and measuring slope on my own just because I was a grad student and that's what they told me to do. But it was the right thing to do, to go out and actually look at that field and see what you're working with in that field. And then there's a lot more information. This seems like, whoa, Nicole, that's a lot of information, but I feel like most of this is already in your plan anyway. So it's just pulling it from that nutrient management plan, which you're gonna have, just letting you know that there is a lot of information. There's a lot of background information, specifics that go into this calculation, but don't panic. Most of this you already have. I did want to talk about estimating erosion. So currently we're using Russell 2, that's the revised universal soil loss equation, version 2. This was the best method we had available for estimating annual soil loss. It's a computer program. You plug and chug all this information in, and it gives it to you. I'm not going to go through it, just in case you were curious what the equation is and just kind of what the different variables that go into that. But I'm assuming you either go to the Russell website or it calculates it automatically in the plan.
You have to use Russell 2.
You have to go to
and then it
Russell 2.
calculates.
But they pretty much have all the information to calculate Russell 2
Yes.
in the plan. Okay, good.
Yep.
Another point to make, as I'm reading the slide again, estimation. none of this is really measured. So no one's going out to a field and like measuring runoff, measuring erosion. Okay, we're using commonly available tools. Your measurements are really your soil test. I mean, you're going to pull the values from your soil test, but other than the soil test, we're pulling this from tools that are available. All right, last thing I want to talk about is how you interpret the score. Okay, so again, I mentioned this, that the PMT score is a unitless value, and based on your score, you fall into one of three management categories. So this is really important that, once you cross that 150 soil P FIV threshold and you actually have to run the PMT, even if you're in the low category, there is still management associated with that. I just want to be really clear, like you're not free and clear just because your score becomes 0. When you have to run a PMT, there are management restrictions, if you will, management changes that you have to make, just for the simple fact that you ran the PMT, all right? So when you end up with a low score, you've got a low P loss potential. Again, these are unitless, this isn't a load, it's just categorizing you. Your P applications should not exceed crop removal over a 3-year period. The whole point in this low category is let's not continue raising that soil P, all right? Let's try to, you are low risk of loss right now, let's keep you in that category, okay? This field is not a problem, let's keep it that way. That is the point of the low category. When you jump up and you're into the medium category, now we're starting to get a little bit more worried. You've got a slightly higher risk of losing P, all right? Let's not, apply more than what your P removal for the year is, all right? We don't want to risk that situation where you're putting out manure, maybe more than needs to be out there, and it gets rained on, and you've got that runoff loss. Or if you're in a ditch-drained area, you could be creeping up on that saturated soil, all right? So medium category is where we're like, all right, let's start toning it down a little bit, all right? And then if you're in that high category, look, you're not putting any P down. You don't need it at that point, okay? And really at this point, you need to be thinking about how do I get my phosphorus lower in the soil? Because you're at a high risk at this point, okay? So those are the categories, and they are what they are. That's what gets spit out. All right, guidance for growers. I was trying to think back to my days as a grad student, and the questions that I always got as I was going around and talking about this PMT idea, right? Or thinking about potential situations that you might run into. You got somebody sitting in your office in front of you, like, oh man, what am I supposed to do about this, man? And you're trying to give them some guidance, all right? So if you are working with a grower and maybe they've got a field or two out of their whole operation that's about at 150, maybe you got to run 1 or 2 PMTs for them. Something for them to think about is, hey, let's not cross that 150 threshold. So if your soil P concentrations are low, meaning you have not hit that 150 threshold, let's avoid getting you above that 150 threshold. And that is because when you get to the point of you're running a PMT, there are management changes just for the sole fact that you ran a PMT, okay? So if folks are low, they're not currently at a risk of losing P from their fields, don't get there, okay? Why is that? Building up those soil P concentrations is a long and slow process. So if you're getting there, there's still time. There's still time to recover, and there's still time to pull back, okay? My recommendations where your soil P is getting there, really monitor those fields, pay attention to your soil test, use your amendments sparingly where possible, okay? If folks are using fertilizer, this probably isn't an issue. We see this more where folks have manure. I only have so much land and I got to get rid of this manure. What the heck am I supposed to do, Nicole? You told me to use my amendments sparingly, but what the heck am I supposed to do, right? Have no fear. There are creative options through the Department of Agriculture. There's manure transport programs. You as a plan writer don't have to have all the answers or have all the resources. Just know that they're out there. So if someone is panicking, man, I got more manure than I know what to do with, keep calm and let's seek some creative options of maybe transporting that manure, through the state, through a whole other part of the state where they don't have feed issues. All right. So that's guidance for growers number one. All right. 1A. You're going to get this because I get this all the time. Well, my soil P is too low. Even if you're at 150 and you're about to the point where you're going to run a PMT. Well, my soil P is too low and I need my soil P to be higher or it's going to start impacting my yields. All right. Get this all the time. You're going to get it. If you've not already worked with farmers, buckle up because you're going to get it. All right. Again, a visual for you to take with you, a nugget of information for you to keep in your head as you're talking to growers here. All right. This is fake data. This is a graph that I made up to illustrate a point, but it makes the point. All right. If we're looking at PFIV down here on the x-axis, and we're looking at relative yield. So relative to 100% yield, doesn't matter. Soybean, corn, pick your pleasure. Doesn't really matter. All right. This is what we know about these soil categories. All right. In the low soil P category, we expect a response from adding fertilizer, adding phosphorus. All right. Once we crest into this optimum range, which is typically between 50 and 100, again, fake data, but it makes the point. You're not going to get a yield response by adding more phosphorus, okay? And if you'll notice, the 150 is at the high end of really what's the excessive cut. You really don't need to add more phosphorus at this point, okay? The 150 threshold was selected very specifically. At no point do we want to limit farmers' yields with these regulations, all right? So keep this fake graph, remember fake data, but keep this in your head if you're a visual learner like me, that even, our threshold is 3 times the optimum, all right? So set your people at ease, calm them down, bring your best calm demeanor to calm folks down that they can be below 150 and they're not going to impact their crop yields, all right? All right, number 2. You got a farmer who's panicking because their soil P is really high and they don't know what to do with it. All right, what am I supposed to do? We have very poor recommendations. What do we say? Implement active remediation practices. Well, what the heck does that mean? It means just keep growing crops, basically. That's the best we got at this point. Don't add any more phosphorus, but keep growing crops to pull down, to draw down that phosphorus in your soil. I know it's a lame answer, but that's the best we got right now. All right, we're working on it. So building up of your soil P was a slow process and drawing down is just as slow of a process, all right? This is unfortunately our only real recommendation. I have been fortunate enough to inherit a long-term phosphorus drawdown project that was started back in the 90s when I was in like 2nd grade. And we have been doing this project for a long time. These fields are still in existence. I'm still growing corn and soybean, and we have not applied phosphorus to these soils since 2001. We add all of the other nutrients, we lime, we just do not add phosphorus, all right? And the initial setup of the study, these are 3 locations, Western Shore, Coastal Plains, Lower Eastern Shore, Upper Eastern Shore, just across the bridge, all right? We compared a forage and a grain rotation, all right? Forage means something like hay, removing all of the above ground biomass, versus a grain rotation, corn and soybeans, where you remove the grain, but most of that plant material stays there on the surface, okay? And we did some long-term modeling and calculations, all right? This is the number of years of no P application to get back down to about 100 parts per million soil P. 25 years, like that's someone's whole career. That's like someone's whole career as a farmer, okay? This is a really slow process. Now, this was independent of what your starting soil P was, all right? But at one of our locations, at this Salisbury location, we actually had a significant effect, meaning the starting point of the drawdown, there was a different amount of time to draw down based on that starting point. So when we started at about 362 phosphorus, to get down to 100, we calculated it was going to take 44 years. That's a career plus as a farmer. All right. So again, I don't need you to memorize this. Just use this as a visual when you're talking to growers. that, like, don't get yourself in a situation where you're at 360 P in your soil, because your children are never gonna see the time when you can apply phosphorus again. Okay. Yeah, I'm done. That's my last slide.
Okay.
I was just talking at this point. Yeah, that's it. That was my point. And here's my contact information. Email is the best way to get me. I will provide Kayla and Brian a PDF copy of these slides so you guys can have it for training purposes. And if Kayla allow, I'm happy to answer questions,
Yes,
but if
go
you
for it.
need me to wrap up,
Answer
that
questions.
too. Okay. Awesome. Any questions? Thank you all for staying awake. Yeah. There. Yeah.
But if someone has an FIV over 150 and they do the PMT, how common is it that they score in the low?
Not a dumb question. I'm going to repeat it so everybody else can hear it too. Is that okay? So if someone has soil P over 150 and they have to run a PMT, how common is it that they end up in the low category? That's a good question. Kayla actually might, someone who does nutrient management plans might actually know that.
Basically, the crux of that presentation is highly dependent on your scenario.
Yeah.
I have seen many of all of these categories.
Yeah.
I have run many PMTs, and the thing I want to emphasize is that all of you should get to the point where you do not have to run very many PMTs. Okay, it should be a last case scenario. It takes a very long time. It's very complicated. There's a lot of management. Also, we do a separate training on PMTs, which probably won't happen until the winter because it looks complicated and it is, and we want to make sure it's done correctly.
Yeah, sure. Did that answer that it really, that typical extension answer that it depends? Yeah. Yeah.
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
So why, since there's so much involved with doing a PMT, why is it even an option? How come if your FIV is 150 or greater, how come it wasn't just capped at that and you can't find?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, if this is so complicated and so time consuming, why do we even do a PMT? Why don't we just say, hey, you're cut off from P application above 150? That was your question, right? That would be extremely restrictive in my opinion. So one of the first points I made was that source is really only half of the equation there. I think that we would end up really restricting P applications, probably somewhat unfairly, to the point where we would be preventing people from using manure in a situation where truly they really don't have a high risk of phosphorus loss. So I think that PMT, from my interpretation, I was a grad student at the time, was kind of like the compromise, right? I think that maybe was initially what some folks wanted, like just cap it, right? But I don't, and I cut out slides because Kayla told me only a half hour, but like there's a lot of science behind the fact that soil P is a soil test report is meant to give a grower an idea of how to fertilize their crop to maximize yield. But Malic 3 to extract nutrients out of the soil, it's not an environmental test, right? It's not saying, oh, you've got high Malic 3, you're going to lose it, right? Because as I demonstrated, there's a lot of science that shows the transport is part of it as well. And so I think following the best science out there created the cluster that is the PMT, and it's very complicated, but it is because there is a lot of management factors that do go into this complicated process of P loss. So I think politically, someone could have chosen to go down that route, but I think it was a little too restrictive at the time. Is that fair?
I think they were looking to identify those critical areas and deal with the critical areas more than, there was a chart at one time that had to do circles and so forth. I don't know.
I showed it.
Okay.
I got you, don't
So,
worry.
it was meant to identify the critical areas and deal with those areas first and work with those types of situations.
That's for me.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? I'll hang out for a few more minutes if anyone has questions, but we can keep moving on, and I'll make sure you guys all get copies of